What's going on, everybody? It's Childish. We're back at it again with the next episode of Educate and Dominate, the one-on-one interview series where we take some of the top names in the game and get their insights so we can bring your game to the next level. My next guest is going to be representing the Epicfail.Delta community, one of the co-leaders there. We have ourselves Badhands. How are we doing today, sir?
Good, Childish. How you doing?
Good, good. It's good to see you once again. If you guys didn't tune in a couple of weeks back, we recently did a top 10 video focusing on Kamoon and some of the counters. Now we're coming back to you with the next video with regards to the series Operation Midgame and talking about the G1 to G3 Guild War defenses, how we can go about transitioning to it. So before we get into that, Badhands, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? How did you even get into that Summoners War and then found your way over to the Epicfail.Delta crew?
Well, I was playing a game called Heroes of Dragon Age for a while, and it got to the point where I was like, it's really repetitive. There's not enough to do in the game, and I was just sitting in the airport one day, and then I happened to look, and I was like, oh, Summoners War, this looks like a pretty interesting game. It looked pretty new. So tried it out, and I've been hooked ever since. And then it was probably a couple months after that, I'd farmed up some pretty good amount of monsters and runes. I got in touch with you, joined up with Epicfail, and then probably about 6 months later, we started Delta as our second most competitive guild in the community here.
Gotcha. And with regards to Delta, can you kind of give a little history on, how you guys have kind of climbed up and held rank and whatnot?
Well, when we started Delta about a year ago, we were pretty consistent G2 to G3 guild. It was like, depending on the week, how many times we got pulled. And just over time, we've just slowly been getting better on the offense and on defensive side, being able to bring down all the top guilds, and being able to get those key wins come Saturday to help us keep our G3 rank pretty consistently for about the past 6 or so months. It's really been a big issue with us with the defenses and the offenses over time, but as you sit in G3, you start to learn a lot more about what to use, what to counter, and how to set up a team to be able to defend against G3 offenses.
Gotcha. And, kind of going into some of the topics that we're going to hit up today, guys. Obviously, the focus is transitioning from G1 to G3, but more specifically, we're going to be looking at a variety of things to include the different types of defenses for some of the up-and-coming players that are not too familiar, how people go about countering these defenses with some of the meta-type offenses, what kind of things you need to consider when talking about, runes. In addition to that, some of the common mistakes that people make and how you can go about incorporating those in your setup so that you can improve and progress well here. So first topic I think we have for today is going to be the topic of G1 defenses. So can you tell us a little bit about that and how you want to break into that?
All right. Well, I've got an example up here of what a actual G1 defense would look like. What we've got a mixture of some Nat 5s and a lot of our PvE units and a lot of units that don't necessarily work at higher levels, but they've got a decent amount of synergy that they can work, but they're very, very common teams with common units that a lot of people see all the time. So a lot of people have counters for them by now. Now, with a lot of times in G1, what people have is they pull a Nat 5 and they go, okay, great. I go out my Nat 5. I'm going to use that everywhere. So I'm going to use it on offense, on defense, but it doesn't necessarily have any synergy with any of the units around it. So what can happen is that, okay, we've got this great unit, a great Nat 5, but we don't have a team that makes it work. And that's what keeps us down in that G1 rank, where we're not thinking of how are people trying to counter me or how can I protect myself against something. It's just we're going, okay, these are the best units I got. We're going to throw them together and hope it works.
Definitely. I can attest to that here. Is there any other kind of teams that you've seen, and not just, just straight Nat 5 teams, any other type of teams that you've seen people just try to use that haven't worked in their favor?
Yeah, a lot of teams that you'll see in G1 are speed teams, and what I basically mean by that is we'll go ahead and we'll show off one of the classics here, which can work pretty much at any level, but we've got our Galleon, we've got our Bernard, and we've got our Theo. So the biggest thing is with this team is for it to work, it's got to be synced. And a lot of times at G1, that Theo is not going to be fast enough, or maybe that Galleon's like 20 speed faster than your Theo, so they're not close enough together that it's going to work out entirely for you. Also, it could be that your you're using a Bernard, and your Bernard is very slow in comparison to other people, so it's not going to be able to outspeed and get its work done that you want it to do. The other teams that you see a lot are hybrid teams, which is normally like a DPS, a healer, and then a speed buffer. You'll see a lot of them. Like a common one would be like Theo, Bernard, and Chasoon, or like Theo, Orion, Chasoon. Different teams like that, but again, they aren't synced. Or they're not quite fast enough as they need to be able to counter what they're trying to counter.
Gotcha. And with regards to all the teams that you've generally seen in the past, which ones do you think for the people that are kind of in that G1, maybe they're looking to transition right now, which one are the ones that you feel like have had the highest amount of success?
The biggest thing is it's all going to depend on runes, but your bruiser teams and your hybrid teams normally have the highest success rate. But it's all dependent on rune quality and syncing. So if they're in sync, they've got good rune quality, that they're probably going to do better than your speed teams, because a lot of people already have counters for speed teams. But the bruiser teams are a little bit different and a little bit harder to counter because they're going to be really tanky. They're going to do a lot of damage. So you've got to be able to withstand that and be able to counter them. And then the hybrids, because they've got the speed buffer, or maybe they've just got really fast units, and they might have a bruiser in them, they might have a healer in them, and then they might have a strong damage dealer. Those normally have the highest kill potential, so that they can take out a unit turn 1, and then you're stuck trying to go 2 against 3 against a speed buffer and a couple other things. It's pretty hard to take care of.
Right. And one thing I kind of wanted to mention here, this is something that we forget time and time and again, is when looking at some of these defenses, especially early on in the game, for me, I've seen a lot more of that YOLO kind of style approach because, ultimately when people, before they got into Guild Wars, they were in Arena, and one of the biggest things that people tend to focus on is the offensive side. That's where you're going to get your points. So you can get those glory points, level up the towers, and so on and so forth. Transitioning over to Guild Wars, obviously from 4 units to 3 units, we have to combine kind of reduce the amount of units that we can use and combine the different types of roles that we bring. And so when people kind of throw their defenses, first and foremost, that speed type of YOLO approach, like the Bernard Galleon there that you're kind of showing, is something that we see so much. Now, everybody looks at this and they're like, you know what, this is not going to win you the fight, so why use it? Ultimately, it's still not too bad of a team, especially at that G1 level, because of the fact of crippling your opponent. If you have that opportunity to take out a unit or two, even if they win, that will still play a negative effect on the teams that they fight down the road. I know myself, as well as Badhands, we've gotten into that situation so many times where we were forced not to be able to attack a +3 that we normally would be able to attack because we lost a key unit in like a +2 or +1 match.
Exactly. That's the big thing. Is the speed teams is people see them and they're like, oh, I've got counters for that, but the ability to snipe a unit and take them out and maybe weaken them for the guild as a whole might be better than putting in a team that is necessarily ruined as well, and that has really easy to counter, but kind of bruisery, but someone's going to probably counter it pretty easily. That speed team at least has a chance to snipe a unit and hopefully for making their life harder to pick on their next team.
Gotcha. And so as we're transitioning forward, one of the things that we have to consider is how our team looks like, how people perceive it, and how we go about, the teams that we would utilize, or both of us would utilize offensively in order to counter that team. What are probably some of the more common meta offenses that you currently see, and how do you go about considering that when you're creating your own Guild War defense?
Well, the 3 biggest ones that most people have are your Copper and Bulldozer and a Messity team, your Lucian team, and then your Theo, Tessarian, and Chasoon team. Those 3 most people have access to. And that way you're not thinking about oh, what nat 5s does this person have? Is this going to work? Is that not going to work? But let's make sure that if anyone attacking my defense tries to bring a team that's a normal team or something that they would always use, let's try to counter that to make them try to force into using a team maybe they don't use as much, and then all of a sudden we have the advantage because maybe our rune quality is going to be better than theirs because they're using a team that they don't often use.
Gotcha. I'm trying to think here if I had any issues in that route. I can't remember any, but one of the things that really caught me off guard as we were climbing up too as well, I believe we haven't mentioned this one yet, is not just looking at the how do I say, the style of one specific team, but the arrangement of the teams that they bring together, right? So for example, if this makes sense here, not just thinking about like a one YOLO team and setting up another kind of bruisers team, but potentially bringing two base YOLO teams, or if you're using a double element setup, two element setup, so you force the opponent to basically, you know, pick a choice onto what team, like the team that they're going to try to counter, you know, which one of the two teams are they going to use. For example, if they have like a Chloe on one team and like a Beta in the other, you know, both teams are going to have that first turn immunity or a crit damage reduction, whatever. So ultimately, if they don't have, you know, different types of buff removal for both, they're going to be at a disadvantage. Does that make sense?
Exactly. The biggest thing is, like, for example, we've got in here that Theo, Bernard, and Galleon team. Okay, so if I want to set up another team, it's best that I don't set up something tanky. Like, it's best I don't put, let's just put Varad, and let's put Eladriel, and let's say, I'll just throw another monster in here. We'll go with Chandra. So if I throw a team like that in, it's going to be easy to go, okay, I can use my counter to this speed team against this first team, and then I can use my anti-bruiser team against the second team. So I'm getting to use my two strongest offenses against you. But, okay, let's say instead of that, I bring Gemini, I bring Orion, and let's say I guess I can go back here and I'll pick up Tower. So I've got two speed teams here. I've got great sniping potential in both of them, and you're going to have to try to bring either maybe like, okay, maybe I've got to try to outspeed this one team, and maybe I'll try to tank out this other team. Is you've got to all of a sudden now change up your offenses to match what I have. So you can't use, okay, this is my team I use against speed teams. I now have to choose which team I want to use that against. And then for that second team, I have to go, okay, I can't use my bruiser team because it's another speed team. What do I have to do here to make sure that I can get the win?
Gotcha. And so, considering some of the factors that we already talked about, you know, making that initial transition from the G1 to G2, and talking about the elemental diversity here on these teams, is there anything else you can think of as far as like key roles, rune-wise or whatnot, that could make a big factor in how they go about, you know, getting those successful wins?
The biggest thing is making sure that they're synced if you're using a speed team. So for like speed teams, they've got to be synced up pretty much perfectly so that no one's cutting in between you and that no one's able to basically snipe all of your units before they get to go. If you're using like a bruiser team, for example, that's a lot more rune dependent on, okay, maybe we're going to be taking the second turn, so maybe we've got to be runed on, like, let's say, Will, so that they can't just outspeed me and kill me. The other thing is you got to take into consideration is certain units might be really good on certain rune sets, but they might be stronger on a different rune set depending on how it syncs in with your team. So you could have a monster, let's go with, let's say, Kuman. So Kuman could be really, really good on a fast Swift set, so that he's got a lot of HP, he's going to be going a lot, he's going to be putting that shield up. Well, for your team, he might be better on Despair, giving you that extra element so that he's bringing you a Despair proc that you didn't have before. So now we've got him with a double use of he's bringing that shield, he's bringing some damage, but now he's also bringing a stun. So it's being able to maybe think outside the box just a little bit to go, okay, what can I do that makes this team stronger with runes compared to, okay, I really just need this one monster to fix it. Well, we could get a multi-use out of a unit by just changing up his runes, and you might catch people by surprise by runing up a unit a little bit differently than normal.
Gotcha. One of the things that we made note early on in the video, I was talking a little bit about the elemental diversity here when kind of incorporating teams. In my perspective, I've seen a lot of different influencers preach about elemental diversity in that aspect here, and how, you know, no one can counter one specific thing. What's your take on it? I see a lot of people using like a double element kind of setup for not just one team but two teams. What's your kind of take on it overall, and what do you think is like a good recommendation for people out there?
Well, the biggest thing is if you bring one element, it's normally going to be pretty easy to counter because you can just bring the element it's weak against. So let's say, like, for instance, I've got my tower here. I could bring a full wind team, and I'm going to do pretty well because that tower is not going to be able to do a ton of damage against me. But let's say I'll mix up this first team here, and let's go with I'm going to bring three different elements. So I'm going to bring my Water Panda, my Rakan, and then I'm going to bring Eladriel. So what I'm bringing here is now you've got to be able to counter that Water Panda and that Rakan, and then my healer is a different element. So that doesn't necessarily have to do too much with the team itself, but it means I can't just bring a water team in, because now that healer is wind, so we're not going to be able to attack that healer as well with just a full water team. So maybe I bring a fire team, but then I've got to take care of the Water Panda, so maybe I don't want to bring that, and then we've got some buff removal, and then Rakan is going to be able to attack any fire unit and do quite a bit of damage. So it makes you bring a more diverse offense, and makes you have to think a little bit more in what you're bringing in. If you bring, say, the whole all the same elements, so let's say I brought Varad and I brought Ariel. So now what I can do is I can bring something to tank all those units. So let's say I've got a really strong fire unit that I know is not going to take a lot of damage, like let's say Leica, because Leica can't get one shot by the Water Panda. So I can bring in Leica and then 2 wind units, and I'm going to have advantage over that team because they're all going to be attacking into one unit. So if I bring support and keep him alive, I'll be able to take out their units pretty easily with my other 2.
Very strong, very strong. And then one thing that we haven't mentioned yet, we've been talking a little bit about the structure of the team, the rune quality in general, but ultimately the types of runes that kind of play a crucial role here. I know this kind of sounds crazy for the community out there because they've heard this in every single video they've ever had, but the importance of real runes, especially for that transition into the Guild War defense, is pretty darn strong. What's your take on it?
It's massive. The difference between a willed rune monster and a non-willed rune monster in Guild Wars is the difference between dying on the first turn and not dying on the first turn. I mean, it's just as simple as that. If you're bringing a team that's going to get outspent, so let's say we're bringing a slower team, like let's say we've got Theo, we've got Chasun, and we'll go with, we'll see, who can we go with third? Let's go with Leica as the third. So we've got Theo, we've got Chasun, and we've got Leica. Now, what's going to happen here is they can bring a speed buffer, and they're automatically going to get the first turn on me. So what can happen is they can go ahead, armor break me, kill my unit before he gets to move. If I have will runes on those units, they're going to move, and then they're going to have will to fight against. So they've got to bring a buff removal. So now I've got to incorporate buff removal into my offense. Okay? So now I've got to have buff removal and armor break, because I can't just bring something that's going to outspeed and then have another armor breaker. I've got to bring armor breaker and buff removal, and then I've got to bring a damage dealer. So we've got to bring 3 different things into one fight. And as we know, unless you've got Tiana, who makes will runes irrelevant, there's always a chance that they're going to get resisted. So even with will runes, you always have that chance that someone's going to go with, let's say, like a Chiwu, go to remove your will runes, and they fail. Well, that unit's probably going to survive the initial burst and hopefully be able to take out a unit or maybe even their whole team.
I'm trying to think here with regards to this these particular setups. One thing I do notice here on the second team, or excuse me, the first team, is that double threat kind of setup here. I think in addition to the will rune factor, moving on into the G2, people understand the value of threats and how creating the compositions is going to allow you to choose basically between who to focus on first is ultimately pretty darn important. So with regards to 2 or more threats, generally speaking, when people look at like a team like Theo and Leica, they're like, okay, these are 2 biggest damage dealers. Those are the 2 main threats, straight up. But people don't realize that there's different types of CC-based monsters that can play a crucial role, and you might have to consider taking him out, versus the other person. Now, can you give me an example of that and how you would go about maybe, going against that team?
All right, I'll give you the best example. Orion is one of the best threat monsters there is in Guild Wars, and he doesn't do any damage. But what he's doing is he's removing buffs, putting debuffs on you, stunning you, going lots of times, going to be taking lots of turns. So that's a unit you have to watch out for. So let's say, for example, we're going to go with one of the classic G3 comps, which is slowly starting to go away as more people are finding counters for it. I got a finder way down here, is our Seer Orion. So right there, Sierra is our threat because we've got bombs. And she can detonate them turn 1, so she can do a lot of damage to your units, but will runes would counter her. But I've got Orion. He's got buff removal. So now, all of a sudden, I've got a chance to remove your will runes and put a bomb on you and blow you up and kill you turn 1. So who do I want to go after first? Well, I probably want to go after Sierra first. But if Orion keeps going, getting more turns, and keeps buff removing me, and keeps stunning me, and keeps adding in defense breaks, that's going to give my other threat enough time to get into it. Another example would be Rakan, and let's say I've got Varad. So Varad is not going to do a ton of damage in this team, but I might go into it and I might go, okay, I've really got to take out Rakan because he's got the most amount of threat I can see on the board. He's going to do all the damage. But if I ignore that Varad has got that AoE reduction and the freeze, that can cause me a lot of trouble. And then let's say I even pair it up with Eladriel. And you go, okay, well, Eladriel's got a heal and a res. The other thing Eladriel has is buff removal on skill 1. So he's got a chance to go remove will runes and then allow a unit to be CC'd. So having all these units that can do different roles, it increases their threat level. That's why you'll always see Orions, you'll always see units basically paired with another unit that can cause a lot of threat. In like the first team, it's the obvious one where you've got Theo and you've got Leica. There's going to be a lot of damage coming at you from 2 sources. But the trickier ones are the ones where you don't really notice the unit is a threat until it's normally too late.
Right? Definitely. Lord knows I've fallen into that situation where they literally set up their team and they entice you to come, and once they pulled you into the fight, like, it's over. I think the one example that I have, I gotta give a shout out to Orange Dreams for way back in the day. Orange Dreams was the first person that I saw incorporate a high speed Figaro light Joker. I don't know if you remember that. I know you fought it a couple times too. It was like a Galleon Figaro X. So Figaro would be 235 on Despair. Chances are, right, 50% chance to use that second skill. And due to his passive, he would move buffs. Galleon would come in, provide the attack and defense break, and then he'd have some kind of a DPS to kind of finish off. And you'd be sitting there like, what just happened? I brought my shield wheel. What just happened? Like, it just screwed up everything. So it kind of just goes to show that, talking about the unique factors here, especially the one where you made a comment about thinking outside the box, outside the monster box when creating the team, is pretty darn crucial because, especially with some of these unique units, especially the light and dark unit category, there's a lot of things you can do with these teams. I know that recently there's been a lot of Iris hype. I know I've used it. I believe Mav Nasty from Malicious. He's played around with it. We got a couple people now playing around with it. Everybody knows about the Light Jasoon now because they saw me get wrecked twice. So that's a kind of a unique unit. But, all that aside, one of the things that we got to put out there is the fact that the light and dark units, while they're rare, is something that we don't see, you're not going to see all the time. So for the majority of the people out there, what do you feel like? Is there certain key units or something to consider when incorporating that universal aspect? Like, how do I say this? Is there something about the Guild War defense, especially in that G2 rank, moving on to G3, that they really need to consider? Like, there's a lot of factors we put in there. What is the most important key factor, in that G2 rank that you're saying, hey, when you want to go G2, G3, this is what you do?
The biggest thing is make sure you have certain things in your teams. So one of those biggest things is make sure that your units sync together. So what I mean, I don't mean speed syncing. I mean that their kits work together to be able to do what you want to do, which is, okay, this is probably what's going to counter me. So I've got to be able to make sure that I've got these units set up and that they're going to move at this right amount of time and do the skills that they want to do to be able to counter. Now, we've all seen the basic teams, like, for example, this Theo Jasoon and Leica. What is the problem with this team is that it only has one defense break. And what happens with that is, even though it's Theo who can go on anyone, once you remove that defense break, it's going to be hard for them to get the win. So having multiple defense breaks is something you want to consider having in most of your teams. Something else you might want to consider is having universal defense breakers or AoE defense breakers. So a universal defense breaker is going to be like Orion, it's going to be Theo, it's going to be Galleon, it's going to be monsters that, despite whatever the element is, they are going to be applying defense break to them. So they're, like, let's say, for a great example, I have Wind Panda. So if Wind Panda is the only DPS in my team that has armor break, Wind Panda is going to be targeting a water unit the entire time. So you can bring in some monster like Tractor here, and he will, since he can't get defense broken, he can just take all the defense breaks for that team, and you'll be able to get the kill because they're not going to be able to do a ton of damage to you because they no longer have a defense break. So it's little things like that that make a huge difference. Now, what I mean by monsters that work together. So we've got Wind Panda, so we know he supplies a defense break. So if they bring a water unit, okay, we're going to be in trouble. So if we pair him with a monster, like let's say Orion, who offers a universal defense break, well, that might change his target. So a wind unit might get defense broken by Orion, so that Wind Panda now all of a sudden is attacking Orion. So Orion is allowing my monsters to attack someone they probably wouldn't before. So that is also very good. Now, if I combine that with a strong threat like Rakan, where he's a big fire unit that can do a lot of damage to a wind unit, or another fire unit, plus an universal defense breaker, that's giving me a lot of options to be able to supply a lot of threat to them. Then I also have some buff removal, which is also pretty important to have. And this is just a team, this is one of the teams that I actually do use because it does have almost everything you can ask in a team. It's got a universal defense breaker, it's got buff removal, it has will runes, it has some form of immunity in Rakan himself, and then also Wind Panda will remove buffs from himself. It's got heals in Wind Panda. So it's got a lot of things that are going on with it and has a lot of threat to it. Now, the other thing it does is it also counters most of those common offenses. Most people are not going to Lucian or Rakan because a lot of times Rakans are built pretty tanky. They're probably going to avoid that. And my Wind Panda is built to have enough HP to survive a Lucian attack. Now, if you're going to try to copper bulldozer it, if you try to copper one of the units, like let's say you've got to be able to, one, outspeed my Orion, then be able to copper Orion, and then you've got to decide who's more important to kill with Bulldozer, Wind Panda or Rakan. Most likely my Wind Panda and Rakan are going to be faster than your Bulldozer, which means they're going to probably have a chance to snipe either Copper or Messity, so then you've got to decide on what to bring there. So the goal is basically you want to make a team that supplies as much possible of buff removal, universal defense breaks, regular defense breaks, threat. If they're going to go probably turn 2, we want some will runes on there. So basically all of those things are put in together will make a successful team up in the G3 ranks.
Gotcha. And one thing, since you kind of put yourself on blast, I'm going to put it down for this round number 2. Going back to one of your topics that you hit up, talking about thinking outside the monster box. You just recently created a new team that included Eladriel already, but you had recently one of the new Dark Liches I think you had, and then I think it was... I'm trying to think here. The Fire Anubis? Is that the one that we included? Yeah. So can you tell?
So this is actually my current defense I'm testing out. If I can find them in here, somewhere around here.
We're basically going to throw your whole defense here so that everybody that's fighting you now knows exactly. They know exactly what they need to do.
There we go. So this is my current team. So on my second team, the goal is I have a universal defense breaker in Grego, because he is an AoE defense breaker who's dark, which means he will not glance against any unit, so he can defense break anyone. I've got buff removal and heal and revive through Eladriel, which then goes with Grego, because as someone dies, Grego gets stronger. So let's say they destroy or kill my Kumin, Eladriel can revive him, and we've got 3 units again. Grego's all of a sudden stronger now. Kumin, he's bringing some high DPS, he's bringing some high threat, and he's bringing that shield to help me stay alive. And the nice thing about my Kumin is he's currently Despair, so he's going to be bringing some stuns as well. So for that team, I've got a universal defense breaker, I've got a healer, I've got and with my healer, I've got buff removal, and then with Kumin, I've got a support plus DPS unit, so he's providing a shield and damage, and so that's going to help me as far as getting kills, and they're all very tanky. So you've got to bring something that's going to be able to outlast them and kill them at the same time.
It's just nasty. Basically what it comes down to is just nasty. And I always forget about the Liches too, with regards to the first, the 1-2 kind of combo there on the first and second skill, being able to provide that slow and then exchange it for a stun if it lands that AoE. So I mean, you literally got, in addition to all the defense break, you got 2 forms of stun there, which just makes it cancerous on the battlefield there. So yeah, I love the team. And again, obviously, when it comes down to this is something that not everybody will be able to incorporate. But if I had to kind of make a note on some of the guilds out there, especially if you have an opportunity, for some of you guys that are listening that are G3 guilds, that are familiar with this, a lot of the teams that are shown here, may not be all too common because you don't have the unit. However, if you take a look at some of the top guilds out there that are not, rushing or non-rushing out there, Malicious, Apollon, AV, we could say what, SSA, what's another one out there? I know I'm missing quite a few here.
Oblivion,
Malevolent.
Obviously EFA.
Yeah, that's kind of a weak team.
Throw them in too. I mean, they're okay. They're okay. They just got Legend last week. Don't worry about it.
Right, no big deal. I mean, but ultimately, there's a ton of teams out there, and you can see like Saturday night. Take a look at the guilds and shout out to every single guild that wasn't mentioned, because Lord knows you guys deserve mention. I'm a little loopy right now, but ultimately, there's a ton of teams out there. A ton of guilds out there that incorporate a really nice variety of compositions that really make you think to myself, should I gamble with this team? Should I even try? And if you got me second guessing myself to fight you versus somebody else, that might be might be something that I should consider. I mean, you already won in my book, so big shout out to all of the top 10 guilds out there in the community that have done a really successful job in making me think twice, or any guild for that matter, mill member for that matter, making me think twice about checking your opponent out, because that's what it comes down to. That's what I really enjoy about the top ranks. So with regards to G3 Guild War defenses, we talked a variety of stuff in here, and ultimately everything kind of adds up. Badhands, is there anything else you wanted to kind of mention with regards to some of the different things to consider in the G3 side?
Well, it's more about how to get there. And going from G1 to G3, obviously monsters are going to help. I mean, they've got to be you've got to have some good monsters that sync together. Now, let's say you're one of those people that don't have any monsters. Speed teams are going to be your best bet to help the guilds out. And that's really what happens, is you might have to take a hit yourself because you might necessarily not get a lot of wins, but you want to provide some threat so that whoever's attacking you, you've got a chance to win, but you've also got a really good chance to snipe units and really try to get monsters down. A lot of people in my guild, for example, in Delta, is we've got some people that, okay, they've got one bruiser team, but not really enough bruisers to make a second team. And we might do a bruiser and hybrid together so that we've got some speed advantage on the second team, and they've got to think about it. Now, one team to consider, which is not too hard to get, for a lot of people, as far as getting into that next level of going up from G1 to G3, is the Kumin, Orion, and Theo team. So it uses 2 Nat 4s, and it's using Theo. This is a pseudo speed team. It kind of fits in the hybrid mold because Kumin's going to normally be pretty tanky, offer that shield, and then Orion's going to be offering threat, Theo's going to be offering threat. So it allows you a team kind of to get up into that ranks, because even though this is becoming a normal defense, you see quite a lot, it's still a good way to transfer up into that G3 ranks without having to really get all those Nat 5s. Mm-hmm. Another way to do it would be like, okay, let's say I'm using Kumin Orion. So my next team, I could want to do something like, okay, I've got Bernard and I've got my Lucian. So you know what? Let me do Galleon, Bernard, Lucian, because I've got no other options. At least you're offering threat, where someone has to think about, okay, well, how fast is that Bernard? How much is Lucian going to hit me for? Am I going to try to counter it this way, counter it that way? There's easier ways to do it, but those are some simple ways of going, okay, how do I get up here without Nat 5s? It's going to be hard. It's all going to be about rune quality. The more Nat 5s you get that work well together, like, for example, my Wind Panda and my Rakan, or like, let's say, Sierra and Rakan, that's definitely going to help out a lot, but you don't necessarily have to have unlimited amount of Nat 5s to get up into G3.
Gotcha. And kind of adding on to that, looking at our Guild War defense currently for Delta, is there any member that you can think of that would be a good example of kind of showcasing, as far as maybe they don't have the craziest units, but the creativity of the team synergy is pretty good?
Here's an example of someone who doesn't have a ton of monsters, and so we've had to come up with some different types of teams. So this is Dharma. So this is a little bit different. It's a play on the Seer Orion comps because we have in Delta we have a lot of Seeras. So we run a lot of Seer Orions because even if one of us snipes and snipes a unit, but we lose, then it makes them harder to pick against our next team. So this is one version of it, which is Seer Orion and Gemini. The advantage to this team is that Gemini is going to remove all will runes and put defense breaks out. So you can't bring any wind units, and it's kind of hard to go slower against this team because Gemini is probably going to stun you. So your only option is to outspeed it and try to take it out. And so that's where the will runes like on Sierra come into play. And then the second team, that's another one of your normal teams that you're going to find, which is obtainable units. So we got our Kuman, we've got our Chasun, and we've got our Theo that we can use to try to get some threat, try to get some sniping ability, and hopefully get a couple wins, but doesn't necessarily mean that this individual defense is going to do super successful, but he could be helping out our guild by sniping units.
Right, definitely. And one thing to mention here, this is a big common mistake we've seen time and time again. We talked about everything, right? Universal defense break, we talked about the concept of units, runes, buff removal, immunity, a variety of things. But ultimately, when we're looking at the units flat out, and especially when you're considering using them on the Guild War defense monster, all things set aside, is that unit max skill? That is a huge factor that I feel like gets thrown under the bus and needs to be considered. Especially with some of these key units here that have low cooldown times and whatnot. For example, one of the most popular ones that we're taking a look at right now is Orion, right? Everybody knows that Orion is good, but if you do not have Orion's third skill maxed, then you are going to be sitting there with a lot of opportunity missed because, you know, his harmless break is not going to go off every 3 turns, but every 5 turns here. So you definitely take that into consideration. I know that once we get these new and unique NAP 5s, we want to slap on the best runes. We want to throw it in there. Like we were talking about in the G1 kind of era, people just throw their best monsters out. They're like, okay, let's see if it wins. And then they're looking at it. It doesn't do the wins. What's the issue there? We kind of pointed out that the lack of structure and synergy is not there, but another thing to consider is that skill up factor, especially if this is a crucial unit that plays a vital role in landing specific attacks in order to successfully get those wins. Is there anything else you can think of, Badhands, that I might have missed?
Just to add on to that, powering up your 1/3s and 5s to max as well. It doesn't sound like, oh man, I really need to get those extra stats. It's about 500 extra HP, like 60 extra defense, 60 extra attack that you're getting, adding to a unit to make it just that tiny bit little tankier, a little bit stronger so it can do max amount of damage. It's very similar to grinding flat stats. And I know a lot of people will get those grinds and go, okay, I'll throw a grind on there and I'll increase flat HP by 250. But then they don't max their slot 5. It's little things like that, just trying to maximize every potential advantage we can possibly get. And it's the same thing with skill ups. Like Kuman, a lot of people might go, okay, I maxed the shield, I can use my Kuman on defense. Well, we're missing a lot of damage from that second skill and a cooldown, and we're missing more chances of us to throw that HP recovery on the first skill. So it really makes sense to make sure those units are maxed so we're getting full advantage of the units to be able to perform the best on defense.
Gotcha. Side question that I have for you. I was thinking about some of the key factors on the arena side, and I don't believe they transferred completely towards the Guild War side, but just to kind of put it out there for the people that are not familiar with the G3 ranks on the arena side, you know, ultimately one thing to be talked about, you know, improving up in the ranks, right, is getting that will root on. It makes a big change here. Well, ironically enough, in the higher ranks, there's a lot of people out there competing for those top spots, and a good chunk of them have, you know, ultimately the #1 attack bar booster, you know, out there in the game, which is Tiana, because she cannot be resisted. She can remove all the will on you and just essentially cleanse you, and then, you know, bring their wombo combo in to get it done. On the Guild Wars side, we make a really key note on the will concept. Is there any reason why you feel that, you know, the mentioning of maybe like a nemesis rune or like a resistance kind of, you know, type of setup would be, can that work on the Guild Wars? Because I know a lot of people use high resistance nemesis units on defense on the Guild Wars side. Can they make ingredients for that on the Guild Wars side?
You definitely can use like a high resistance nemesis unit The biggest thing is with Will is it's always probably going to be the strongest rune on defense for a team that's going to get outspent. And unless you're already one of those guys like you're just talking about that's got a really, really fast buffer, you're probably going to get outspent. Like unless you're Barian with his like 300 and whatever speed Orion, or Chuffles with his 317 speed Bernard. I mean, chances are someone's going to outspeed you at some point. So having those will runes on is going to be really, really helpful to be able to negate that first turn advantage you can get in Guild Wars. Because the disadvantage of Guild Wars to Arena is, like, if you fail in Arena, you can just go ahead and try it again. You're banking on in Guild Wars is that that person goes in, we can hopefully counter what they're trying to do, and we can get that win, because you only get one chance. They don't get to come in and try your defense again until they pull you again, maybe the next week or 2 weeks later. So the real goal is trying to get, okay, let's get protection here and we'll do well. So if we've got, like, let's say a speeder, like a speed team, like a hybrid team, like a Sierra Orion and like let's say a Ladriel. It might make sense that Eladriel might be on Nemesis because he's not going to get hit first, because most people are going to try to take out that Sierra right away. So that's what you can change it up. Or, like, let's say we've got a unit that we know is probably not going to get attacked first. That one necessarily doesn't need will, but you do want some high resistance just so it can resist that defense break. Obviously, will is one of the easiest ones to get because it's a 2-set. It's a little easier to get 2-set runes than 4-set runes, but it depends on how that monster is going to be attacked. So if you don't think it's going to get attacked first, like if you built a comp and you go, okay, this monster is definitely not going to get attacked, like let's say for Eladriel and like a Sierra Orion Eladriel, then sure, Nemesis might be better, or okay, I've got my Aerial or my that I might be using, then it could work. But again, you've got to make sure you have that synergy in your team so that will isn't necessary on that unit.
Gotcha. And I think the last thing that I kind of want to mention, this kind of goes a little off track, but still kind of in the thought process of how to improve essentially not just your performance, but the performance of the guild, is some of the things that we currently do in the Epicfail.Delta community that other guilds don't. And so, Badhands, I know that we recently talked about, the focus of, putting your best runes on your best units when it comes to Guild Wars specifically, so that you can do well. One of the things that I know you guys use, and I say you guys as in us, we use, is the concept of Guild War notes. A lot of people kind of shy away from it, but can you kind of explain the importance of it and how you feel it can ultimately assist your community in climbing up in the ranks?
For Guild War notes, the biggest thing is that what you're doing is hopefully only getting trapped once by defense. So let's say, like, for example, my first defense, no one knows what my Orion speed is because I'm not in World Boss rankings, I'm not in Arena rankings until you attack me. So you attack me, and all of a sudden you go, oh, wow, that Orion was really fast, or that Orion was really slow, and it was on Violent, or it was on Swift. So if you can let the next person know, hey, this Orion's only, let's say, 220 speed on Violent, okay, I know I can outspeed that with a lot of different units. So it gives us that advantage of getting to know which teams to pick and to use. So, like, let's say we go into a fight on my second team, let's say, and you go, oh, there's no will runes on this team. Okay, I know I can outspeed that now and attack and use a team I might not have picked, not knowing if there was will runes or if something was going to outspeed me.
Gotcha. Yeah, I feel like that concept of Guild War notes is pretty darn crucial, and not just for more like kind of getting a heads up on what's going on, especially if you guys are in that fight that's going to be, make or break in order to get the win. But the educational aspect for me is way too strong not to consider it. Let me put it into perspective, right? We just talked about a variety of stuff to help you guys transition from G1 to G3. Ultimately, you can create all the, you can always have all these concepts and you can try to put it into perspective, but maybe there's something that we didn't mention. Maybe there's something that you've been able to see or notice that people have messed around with or tested on a variety of different teams that you guys find, in the higher ranks or whatnot. So having the opportunity to see some of those teams and take a look at it, analyze the notes that people put on there, makes you kind of wonder, it's like, wow, I like what he's trying to do there. I have a unit that's similar to that factor. Can I create something, right? Can I make lemonade out of lemons or something like that, right? So having that available for you guys obviously is going to help you come down the road when it comes to what you're trying to counter, not counter, but the educational part for me was really a crucial point in order to kind of like improve my knowledge and just kind of get a better understanding of why people do it, because that's what it comes down to. One of the things that we do in the Epicfail community is we'll post basically Guild War defenses, and we'll ask each other, how would you go about countering this? You know, because ultimately, if you can't understand what your opponent is trying to do, they have won. You know, is there anything else you can think of?
Is the biggest thing is just going back to what I said before, is thinking outside your own monster box and thinking just outside the box on teams. For example, my second team, I have an offense that it's going to be 100% win against that team every single time. But I know with the units I have, not everyone's going to have that team available to them. So it's just because you have a counter to it, you've got to think what you're using to counter. Like, for example, my counter requires a Nat 5 and an LD Nat 4. Not many people have those. So even though I can beat my own team, it's still a good team to have, because any team you put out there is going to have a counter. You're never going to see anyone with 100% defense success. You might see some people above 50, but no one's going to be 100%. Someone's always going to be able to have something that counters your team perfectly, but we don't want it to be something that's easily obtainable. So you want to have something, okay, I know this will counter my team, but it requires Galleon Zyros and Tiana. Okay, well, how many people have that? Well, only like a couple. So, you know what? Do I need to build my team to counter that exact thing? No, because only a couple people will be able to use that team against me. Everyone else is going to have to try something else. So it's that type of thinking helps you, because a lot of times you'll think of a team and you're like, oh no, it's too easy for me to beat with this. So it's not just about what you can beat. You've got to think how many people, one, have those units, and two, are built like that would be able to easily counter your team, and then you can go from there. Because the biggest thing really is you want to build teams that it's going to defend against the easily obtainable teams and common teams you see on offense. And if you can do that, you're going to have some success on defense.
Gotcha. Very cool. And, you know, when it comes down to the Guild Wars perspective, we've talked about it with a lot of different guests that I've had on the Educate and Dominate series, talking about some of the things that Comptos can consider when trying to improve it. A lot of people made mention of the RNG factor, how defenses get pulled versus not getting pulled, especially when it comes time to rush hour. Is there anything randomly you can think of that you would like to see change, you know, for the better? If you could, you know, put your voice out there.
I mean, I would love to have a place we could practice Guild Wars. That's really the hardest part about Guild Wars. You can't practice. Like Arena, you've got all week. You can mess around, do whatever you want, try different teams out. It's not going to affect anything, because come that end of the week towards the rush, then we can go ahead and win. There's no way to practice Guild Wars right now, so the only way to do it is experience. You just have to go against like guilds like Malicious, guilds like Oblivion, guilds like Apollon, guilds like Epicfail.Delta, over and over and over again until you get used to, okay, this is what is like G3 quality. This is what team I have to bring to counter this at this level. So I would love for them to have some kind of like, even if it's just a friend battle with Guild Wars, because how the system is now, I don't think they're going to take the RNG out of it, where you can get pulled by 6 guilds on reset day, or you get pulled by no one. So I mean, it's just kind of all up in the air, but I'd love to see some way that you could practice going in against certain teams.
Gotcha. Right on. Cool. Well, that's all I can think about with regards to this video. Is there anything else you wanted to add for the community?
I think that's it.
Alrighty. Well, thank you again, Badhands, for coming on board, for doing both videos, the Commune Counter video and this one as well. I really do appreciate you taking the time to provide us this content.
No problem.
Alrighty, guys. So again, if you guys haven't tuned in from especially the first video and now last video, Badhands is obviously a Epicfail.Delta leader, but he is also a YouTuber. So please do me the honor of checking him out. I will leave his link in the YouTube description down below, so you can go ahead and follow him and check out some of his content. All right. That is it, guys. Thank you all so much for tuning in for this episode of Educate and Dominate. It's your boy Childish and Badhands with ChildishPlays checking out. Take care, and we will see you next time, guys. We're out.